Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Perfect, but I can't see it in your faces quite yet. So, please, as we go along, drop things in the chat, and Irene will help with that. And then we will certainly do time for Q&A at the end. But if you haven't already, would love to know a little bit more what Grace wanted to say about what you have in mind for the next year. And absolutely, if you have any specific questions, go ahead and pop those in, and hopefully I'll cover them while we talk. But if for some reason I don't, we will gather them at the end. So welcome to the presentation event in the post quote unquote COVID era, live, virtual, or hybrid. As Irene said, my name is Amy Crowell, and I have about what'll be 15 years nearly of experience in the nonprofit world. I spent 7 working for the national nonprofit Share Our Strength, No Kid Hungry, doing everything from event management here in the Atlanta area to I had a grassroots fundraising national position with them at the latter part of my time with them. And then for the last 7 or so years, I've been just doing some fundraising consulting for typically small to medium-sized nonprofits that are very often caught in that catch-22 of they want to raise more money so they can do more mission, but they don't have the money to pay the fundraiser. So sometimes often I'm able to plug in myself and my colleagues and just help build that bridge. And we always think we do our job right, then we're either helping short-term with an event or something like that, or we help you raise enough money so that you can hire someone full-time and kind of work ourselves out of a job. But early on in my consulting work, I did write a book about fundraising because there's all sorts of books I found about, how to put on the event, the actual logistics of the event, but it didn't really talk much, or there wasn't a lot out there, at least at that time, about how do you really maximize the event revenue and the opportunity to engage with new donors and that sort of thing. So that's what the majority of my book is about. And I do have electronic copies if anyone wants one, they can connect with me after. So today we're going to talk a little bit about event fundraisers. The main ones that I see out there are the sort of the run, walk, 5K type events, the golf tournaments, as Irene just mentioned, and the galas, which someone else just mentioned. And just where are we in the world of live versus virtual versus hybrid? We'll talk a little bit more about hybrid, a little bit more about what to think about with COVID, even though in theory it's gone, and then just some trends, and then obviously leave some time for questions. So one of the things I'd like to touch on beginning is why to fundraise for these events. I went to a meeting several years ago, and the person got up on stage and said, "You never want to do events. Events are awful. They take all your time. They don't raise that much money, and you should just not do events." And I'll be honest, I don't feel like that. I agree with everything that person said, minus the don't do them. But I think events have a really good and often very important place in a nonprofit fundraising scheme. I think they are good because of the revenue they raise, obviously, and they're unrestricted dollars versus some organizations are very grant focused or whatever. You still need to earn the lights, even though they might not fit into that exact grant proposal. I think they just really give nonprofits an opportunity to raise their awareness, to bring new people into the kind of sales funnel, quote unquote. You can find new volunteers, it's a way to find new whatever you need. Board members, volunteers, advocates, donors, of course. It's just a place that people can invite their friends to learn more about what they're passionate about. And if you're doing the event right with the mission portion, you will just find new people that will have a love and care for your organization. And I think equally, it's an opportunity to think and engage and re-engage your existing supporters and just remind them why they give, or maybe remind them why they might want to give more. So in my world, I think there's a really important place for fundraisers, despite the fact that they are very time consuming and expensive often as well. So I kind of like to start with that. So if anybody has any thoughts or comments, Irene, please feel free to interrupt me because I can't see the chat. So I can't tell if I need to stop.
But I just wanted to let you know your slides are not advancing. I'm still seeing the home slide, and that may be perfectly fine, but
no.
There you go. Okay.
Is that better? Okay. So
I figured you were on the why fundraising events.
Yeah. Is that showing now? So it's so ironically on mine is not even showing on yours, but that's okay. I'm glad you told me that. Okay. So that was my why. So most common events, like I said, we're going to talk about the 3 most common, but again, I have some ideas at the end of some others. So we'll start with the run or walk event, which is often a 5K, but it could also be a 10K. It could be a half marathon, a marathon. It could be a biking race. This is really more athletic events, but walk run seems to be the most common. In general, what I'm seeing is that walk and run events, and really all athletic events are back on and they're back in person. What I'm also seeing is that they often are offering the virtual option still. So I think you'll see this as a theme for today's presentation, that there's a lot of things that worked through the pandemic that people are keeping. And one of these is, I think in the old days, I am a super casual runner and I do some races. And there was always like this ghost runner option in the old days where you basically just paid the money and maybe you got the t-shirt. But now I think what we're seeing is it's just a little bit more robust. And so you're offering to get up and go to the race at 7 and be out there on the course with the other runners or walkers or other athletic people and to do it in a group, or you can go out and run your normal 5K in your neighborhood and make the donation and get the t-shirt and do it on your own time. I was listening to a talk with it. There's a woman who ran the Atlanta Track Club 5K recently, and I say ran loosely. She just broke the world record for the 80 plus division. And she said how she went into that race that day. But in general, she just signs up for the virtual option because she doesn't drive when it's dark. And so she just does it in her neighborhood. So I think keeping that open and that available to people is smart and a good thing to do. You'll see all these event or slides we're going to talk about that I'm going to say, be sure to tie in your mission moments from the start, promotion through post-event. I have been to events that are great, I loved, and I knew what organization they benefited, and I didn't know anything else. I knew the name. Like I said earlier, I think it's easy when you're doing events, and I have been guilty of this myself, to really focus on the logistics of the event, like where are the cones going to be, and where are the police, and where's the security, and where's check-in, and just really forget, or not forget, but maybe not focus as much as you should on really the mission. Like every single person who runs your race should know what you do, your name, how to find you online, how to make a donation, and like the main mission of what you do. And hopefully more, you maybe have a testimonial opportunity or something of that nature, but at the very least, those things. So a couple ideas about maximizing revenue is really trying to tap into your local expertise. So whether that's a running store or you have a special announcer or a guest speaker, somebody does the warm-up that's fun and compelling. This is a place where potentially there's some influencers in your community that can help you raise awareness of the event or get more people there, that kind of thing. Other ideas are the VIP package where maybe it's $30 to run normally, but for $50, you get a little special hat or you have a little meet and greet with the CEO post-event or however you want to do it. But sometimes there's a way to have an incremental registration amount that can maybe give them a little bit more, which can raise your revenue overall a little bit. Obviously, you're selling your sponsorship. It's my goal. And any event I do is that I have covered all of my hard costs for the event with my sponsor sales. That can be hard to do year one, but the goal will be moving forward so that whatever else you do, and especially with a run, you may really need that because you're probably going to get some day of people registering, but at the same time, if it rains, you may not. So you want to make sure you have all those covered. And then really, I think, especially for the runs, it's a little bit harder. And when I say runs, I do mean all athletic events. Be aware, have an option to make a donation as you're registering. And after the event, say, give them an opportunity to, again, make another donation. If this was fun, you had a great time, you care about what we do, here's how you can help, what it can do for our audience. That is the main stuff about run walk. Next type of event is what Irene just mentioned, which is the golf tournament. Again, golf tournaments are mostly back in person without restrictions. And I've seen that even since last fall. It's been a while that the golf tournaments are still happening in person. Again, outdoors is easier and feels safer, even when things are a little bit more hairy than they might be right now. I think the downside of the golf tournament is there's not as much of a hybrid event. You could still do some of what you did, which is let there be virtual golfers and they golf on their own place or time and stuff. But I think it's a little more challenging, and being that it's outdoors and people are feeling a little more comfortable. I'm not seeing a lot of golf tournament hybrid. I'm just seeing in person. Again, keep your mission front and center, whether it's whole signs that talk about what you're doing and your mission, obviously signs at the entry area. There's still, I think, again, in the realm of what to keep, there's still a lot of opportunity to use some of that technology that made it a little bit more COVID friendly in the past, where maybe you're not doing the long queue of people at registration anymore. They're just registering online and you're using technology more and more to keep people a little more separated or, not in these like lines of people. Again, one of those situations where keeping some of what you had could be a positive thing. As far as maximizing revenue, similar, really basically the same ideas, tapping into that local expertise, thinking about the VIP package. Is there something you can add on? Maybe it's a swag bag, maybe it's a special breakfast or lunch after, something of that nature, dinner, depending on the time of day. Sponsorships, again. One of the things I didn't mention around sponsorships is I always do the typical platinum, gold, silver, bronze sponsors, but I usually will do some what I call marketing oriented sponsorships where, you know, most of you, I'm sure, know that funds can come from a corporation from their philanthropic side, but sometimes they come from marketing. So the idea of being the electronic scorecard card sponsor, so your logo is on everybody's phone while they're keeping score, to me, that's more of a marketing oriented sponsorship. And I try to include those. It could be a photo booth. And for the gala, there's lots of things. There's wine glasses and things of that nature. But I've found that having at least a couple of those, like 2 to 5, depending on the overall level of your event. But like another good one for run or walk, or even for the golf, is like a water bottle sponsor. So you have their logo on the water bottle. And you just want to make sure when you're pricing those that you cover your expense for that extra, whatever it is. And then obviously more so that you're still netting. The only exception to that rule is if it's something that you were going to buy anyway. Like, for example, you had to buy wine glasses. It's just a little bit more to have them engraved with the sponsor and hopefully your logo as well. Then you maybe don't make as much if you cover the cost that you had to have anyway. Moving on to the galas.
Amy, I was going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this varies by community, but how open are golf courses to hosting tournaments? Usually those are probably like on Mondays, a slow day or something like that.
Yeah. I have several clients that have done them. In fact, one of my clients just did one in Nashville like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But yeah, honestly, even during more of the height of COVID, the golf courses did want those events. Sometimes they were doing them over 2 days instead of 1 day to space people out a little bit more. But I'm finding they're very up for it because they're trying to fill their slow days, just as you mentioned. They are on Mondays and Tuesdays, or one of the ones we do is the Friday before Thanksgiving. But yes, I'm finding a positive. Even they were one of the earlier ones I think to bounce back because of it being outside.
Excellent. Thank
Yep. Galas. And when I say galas, it could be a seated dinner, it could be a tasting event, it could be something more themey like a casino night or something of that nature. Again, I'm saying those are back in person too. I've had 2 weeks ago, I had a 150 person seated dinner. 2 nights ago, we had a big tasting event. There were probably 1,500 people total in 3 venues. It was very spread out. But I'm seeing they're back. I'm seeing they're back without masks. People could do what they want, of course. But I think at the event, there's Sunday night that I went to, I really don't think I saw 10 people wearing a mask. So people are ready, I think, as much as possible, or at least those that maybe don't, feel comfortable. They don't have something that's holding them back from a health perspective are back and they want to do them. I'm finding that people are just frankly like really excited to see each other and spend time and talking, and they're very clustered together, reconnecting with people they maybe haven't seen in a while. So that is what I'm seeing. I think, again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Some of these events are a little bit more COVID friendly than another. A seated dinner, you're sitting down for certainly more than the 15 to 20 minute recommended next to people. It's fine if it's your spouse in your household or whoever lives with you already, but maybe you're less comfortable being across the dinner table from strangers or other households, I'll put it that way, for that couple hours that it takes to manage that. The really good thing about these galas is there's really a good sponsor hybrid opportunity for those. So, for example, you could do the program, but live stream parts of it, or some of it may be pre-recorded, so you can work on that. So I think among all these types of events, the gala or some kind of evening or afternoon event has the best hybrid opportunity. But there's some pitfalls with that we'll talk about in a second. But again, tying your mission in from the start, like I've said in all the other emails. Sorry, I got that same one in there twice. for your revenue side, your fundraising is going to come from those same 4 areas that it always does. There's sponsorship, ticket sales, auctions, and then the panel raiser donations. And then the e-journal could be some ads that you're selling. So again, I think all of those are fine and great and can continue in the way that they did, either if it's live or if it's in a virtual atmosphere. Around VIP packages, again, I definitely recommend those when you're doing a gala type event where you have a ticket that maybe sells for a little bit more. Maybe it means they have premier seating. Maybe they get in a little earlier, especially with the tasting event. Maybe they get special valet parking or a gift bag or those kind of things. But those are a great way to up your revenue, especially in an event where you have a finite number of people that can be there, which I know all have finite, but like a seated dinner is a little more finite than a tasting. Again, I think these like marketing and gathering moments are appreciated. Right, so I'll pause there for a second to see if anybody has any questions about those 3 types of events and if there's anything specific around that you want to ask.
Please feel free to drop any questions or thoughts or comments in the chat. We'll get that answered. And Amy, while we're waiting for questions, when you think about the 4 main areas for a gala that you mentioned, is there any ideal in terms of, say, your goal is $100,000? Is it typical to have it come in evenly from those 4 areas, your sponsorships, your auction, or it really just depends on the organization and the contacts and the board members they have?
Yeah, it does. I think typically what I see is the sponsorship, especially for an event that's been around a little bit or more established organizations, you'll see a higher percentage coming from sponsorship. But it's interesting. I have had certain events that the auction will raise half of it, and then others in the paddle raise, and others where it's less. So again, I think too, if you're looking at a seated dinner, you have a little bit more of a captured audience, so that auction and paddle raise is a little harder for people to achieve it. Now that being said, you only need 2 people who want the same item to rise the price. It doesn't have to be a ton of people. There's always a thought that's like, no one's listening to the auction. I'm like, who cares? We just need the right 20 people to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to do, but yeah, so there's definitely some back and forth in that. And a lot of it really depends on the history of the event, who's attending.
Yeah.
But yes, like I said, my rule of thumb is I really want to cover all my costs before I walk through, because I don't want to think. I also think it's just nice to say every donation tonight, 100% goes to this.
Notice too. Yeah. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Leslie wants to know, are you seeing people want to limit the people able to attend? And then Leslie, I think you say both venues are just organizations in general. I think organizations in general, Amy, are you seeing that they want to limit attendance at these things? Or again, it just really depends?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think some of the tips I'm going to say later talk about like spacing and what's more friendly than not. So we'll cover a lot of that. But what I'm more finding is that people are picking bigger venues for the same amount of people. If you were going to, not to call out somebody, Montana holds about 200 people. Maybe you have it at Pyramid Mill, the Foundry, because it holds 400 people and it's just a lot airier, so to speak.
Oh,
there's, I think that's more what I'm seeing than eliminating potential gap.
Okay. Eli's asking, what are the main considerations when planning a hybrid event that includes both online and in person? And you might be about to answer that question. So if you are, we can say, but I don't know if you're getting ready to answer this question. What about separate sponsorships for the in-person versus online elements of an event? Is that something
I think seeing? I have not seen that. I think you could do that. It's going to be hard to separate. What I would say is maybe I would add a second sponsorship or an additional sponsorship just that the online people would see, but still depending on the price. So not have company A do the virtual, company A do the B do the in person, but more the virtual person maybe gets a little extra logo love on the screen, that kind of thing. And maybe charge a little extra for that. Or maybe they're a silver sponsor, but if they put in another X amount, they get that too. I just think when you're doing your marketing, you're going to market it all together with the 2 options. So you don't want to have to create 2 separate marketing channels for those things. But adding it on as an extra, I think is a great idea.
Okay. Yet another reason to work with somebody like you who has experience. That's a lot of things to think through. All right. Now I think we're about to answer Eli's question about the main considerations when planning a hybrid event.
Yeah. So these are things to consider if you're trying to decide, should I do live, should I do virtual, should I do hybrid, what to think about. So I think the type of event is huge. Again, the golf tournament, the athletic event, more friendly than it used to be. I went to a run, I think it would have been January 2021, where there were dots there were waves of people starting. There was not the group start. There were literally waves and you had a dot to stand on and then you would go. That's all gone now. Some people actually will wear masks while they're in the crowd. Oftentimes we're outside and we're going to hope for the best, right? So the type of event is important time of the year. Again, if you are doing an indoor event, but you can do an outdoor cocktail hour, that is more COVID friendly than if you're all inside and packed together. Indoor versus outdoor, I talk about. And I think who attends is really important. If you have a group of people who are attending who are potentially more at risk, you really have to consider, like, you don't want to do something that's potentially going to make your target audience of people you're trying to help. And for example, I have a friend that was head of a cancer foundation organization. And like, it didn't make sense to have something that would potentially put some of these people at risk that are, more at risk than average. So you have to think about that. And I guess, again, your audience and your organization appetite for risk. And what I mean for that is not so much what kind of event to have, but are you going to be comfortable with having to delay it or cancel it if things ever flow? The event that I talked about a couple of days ago was supposed to be in early February, and nobody wanted to delay it, but it absolutely was the right decision, but very hard to make. And I'll talk about that a little bit too. If you are just kind of nauseous thinking about all this uncertainty, which the reality is still exists, maybe a line event isn't your direction to go. And then the availability of workers and volunteers, and this is huge. One, I think there's a set of people who don't want to volunteer because they just don't want to be in these group settings. And then there's also the truth that some people we had somebody the other night that was supposed to work registration that tested positive for COVID the day before and can't come. So you just have to be aware that even though we always know volunteers drop off, there's even a heightened amount of that happening. So for live events, and I'm going to do live, hybrid, and virtual only. So we'll chat through all that if you're thinking she's still not answering my question. So for live events, you really need to decide on your COVID protocols, I think, early on. So do people have to show a vaccine card? Do they have to show a negative test? If that negative test is being shown, how old can it be? Can it be a quick test from home, or does it have to be more involved? Are you going to take temperatures? And I think this is important because even this event I had a couple of weeks ago, when we planned, things were really bad and we had all these things in mind. But then now as things got better, there were staff members just saying, I don't think we need to do this anymore. The numbers are down. But the reality is we'd already advertised to people that we were going to do it that way. And I think some people make a decision to buy a ticket based on those protocols. So I suggest if you pick them and knowing it may be a little uncomfortable at the time if things change. But I recommend you pick some protocols and stick with them. And then really promoting those protocols. If you're going to ask people to show their COVID vaccine card or take a test, I think it's what to know before you go 3, 4, 5 days before. It's a reminder the day prior. It's another text the day of, especially if it's like an event where you come after work and you would have to have brought it from home ahead of time. More and more people have them on their phones now because this is becoming more and more common. And I think as time goes on, it gets even more common. It's not as much of an issue. But there's still going to be somebody who forgets. And then, so what happens when somebody forgets? Are you going to provide on-site quick tests? Are you going to know that those people are going to be super annoyed? They probably are. But that's where you can be like, we sent multiple messages. We're still trying to be as conscious as we can for people's health. If you decide you do not want to do all those things, which is legit, what I would recommend is there's 3 or 4 things that you should send to people, a list of 3 or 4 things you should send to people prior that said, don't come if you don't feel well. Don't come if you've tested positive. Don't come if you've been in contact with somebody who's had. And then you just need to decide, are you going to refund those people's money? Are you just, and you're not saying you need to do that, but just have all the decisions made ahead of time when they're out of the emotion of the moment. And also, what are your vendor protocols going to be? If you're doing a catered dinner, do the catering staff need to wear masks? Do they need to be vaccinated? Which I will tell you is hard to make happen because, again, with the labor shortage, that would be something you would want to communicate very early on to your caterer or other vendors that you're working with if they need to do that. Other COVID considerations is, like I mentioned before, space is really your friend. Larger venues than needed, I think, are positive. It gives you places, especially if you're doing something seated. But even if you're not, it gives you just more room for people to mill around. We did an event recently and we seated less people at each table than is the typical. Those tables are always super tight. I think people were probably just really happy about that, to be honest. Other thing to think about is cancellations are very common, again, because someone might test positive or whatever. So if you have your auctioneer or testimonial that's key or whatever it is, a committee member that's managing the stage, whatever that may be, it's good to have a backup plan and if possible, have somebody that sort of shadows the person. So for some reason, literally that morning, that person can't come, even though they've had every intention of the day before, that you have a backup plan for that. The other thing I really recommend is that, again, early on, when things are fine or not, you have a go, no go strategy as well as a date. If you have an April 15th event and you owe your catering numbers by April 1st, that maybe on March 25th, you really look at the atmosphere. You may just not need to think about it at all because everything's fine. But if things are not looking as good, then I recommend you decided what these go, no go things are early. So again, you're like less emotional. And then there's always going to be someone that says, oh, you should have done it, or someone that says you shouldn't have done it. We said we've thought through these things. These are the things we're looking at. So what some of my other clients have looked at is what's going on in the city and county. Are they mandating masks? Are they limiting group gatherings? That one could be immediately. If you can't gather for more than 100 people and you've got 200 people legally, then you probably won't even let you have it. So or shouldn't let you have it. You can look at hospitalization rates. You can look at cases. Again, looking who your audience is, and then deciding about, what you're going to do around cancellation or postponement if needed. Hopefully you just postpone and not cancel. That is mostly what I'm seeing, or you can pivot something virtual too. So those are the live considerations. For hybrid events, and this will answer the question from, I think it was Eli. It's interesting, and I think this is true too, and I heard this on something I saw recently, is that I think people almost expect hybrid to a certain extent, maybe not so much on a gala dinner. If you're doing a association meeting or whatever, I think people just think, well, great, we can go in person or we can just dial in if we want. Think about that and think about if your audience is going to expect that. If you are having a hybrid option, sometimes it'll add expenses, sometimes it won't. Sometimes it's literally you're just going to pop it up on Zoom. But if you're doing a gala or something live where there's going to be speakers, you probably are going to have at least some incremental expenses. And I would recommend that if you're not tech savvy in that type of atmosphere, that you hire somebody to do that. I have a colleague that does a great job. I hired her for my event because she like making sure everything is smooth from an AV perspective can be challenging on a normal day, and then tie in a virtual audience and the timings and all that. And it could really be helpful to have somebody else working on that. Or maybe you have a committee member that's great with that. But I would recommend it not be the main event planner because you're going to be pulled in a lot of ways, and that's a big component. I do think you want to make it more than just like a virtual stream for the attendees, unless it's just like a speaker. I think that's okay. But if you're doing a gala event, people are coming for dinner, maybe there's a way to just enhance it for the person that's coming. I went to a community foundation had an event and you could go live or virtual, and they sent little charcuterie boxes ahead of time. It was an option. Like they just did little things to make it seem a little more special. And frankly, I think really tie people to come and actually attend, because if you've gotten a gift ahead of time, you're not like, it's 6 o'clock. I don't like getting on Zoom one more hour today. That can really recommit you to coming. When the Zoom and virtual galas were really popular, there was a huge drop-off rate between people who registered versus attended, especially if it was free, which a lot of them were. And that's always going to happen, but trying to minimize that is good. Know that you will need a little extra staff or volunteer assistance for those virtual guests. Hopefully mostly gone are the days of people who can't figure out how to log on and stuff like that. But usually you do need at least somebody who's dedicated, so if somebody needs assistance, they have it. We're all a little tired of being on Zoom, so thanks today for being with us. So trying to fight that fatigue by doing something cool or different, I think is important. And if you are doing something where you're going to do some online fundraising where people can donate right then and there, it really needs to be easy technologically and not a big hassle to do that donation, or else you're just going to lose people. The other thing is that your timeline is going to really need to be tight if you're doing this hybrid. So if you're telling people The event starts at 5:30 and we're going to cocktail, and at 6 is when we're doing the program. You really got to be ready at 5:59 because you're going to have this whole audience of however many people ready to log in. And if dinner's running a little late or whatever, like you're still going to have to roll with it. So you just have to be aware of that, or have built in some waiting time music or something that lets people know that it's still going to start more or less than it's supposed to. I think one of I'm moving on to some of the trends, because I think those are the big things about the hybrid. But now we're just seeing hybrid's not unusual. And back when nobody would have done it, now it's very common. And I think there's some really positive things about it. And I'll talk a little bit more about even just virtual only in a minute. But it opens your events up to anyone, and it allows for better data collection because most people have to log in some way, and they came and they're not somebody's friend that came along that never really had a name on their ticket. We're seeing some other trends that more and more organizations are doing a bunch of smaller events instead of the big, large one. I think that's probably shifting a little bit because things with COVID are better, and I do see big events coming back. There's something to be said about the smaller, more intimate events. If you've got 1,000 people in the room, there's no way you can steward 1,000 people, even if you have a fairly large staff. So, that helps to have those smaller events. These events can definitely be part of your PR strategy because, again, you don't have to be in town to go to the event at the History Center. You can log online from wherever, whenever. And so that, really opens some other possibilities to you. And then we're just seeing more, this is off the nonprofit side, but just more internal events for remote people working. I talked to someone the other day that said that their company did like a escape room, a virtual escape room, and they had teams, and it was like a really cool team building event. Everybody's sitting in their own home office. So, you may see other things, and maybe that's your fundraiser. You want to do an escape room for your board. It's like a team building thing for your board of directors. In education and conferences, you're seeing much more hybrid, where you can go in person and be at the event, or you can just log in for these great educational sessions, whether it be a college class or an academic conference or conference in your area, your nonprofit area, or a nonprofit overall. I know that the Association of Fundraising Professionals, I think it was last month, had both in-person and hybrid as an option. And you're seeing more and more trade expos that have a virtual component too. So again, you could either be a virtual sponsor where you have a little booth, or you can be there in person, a little bit of both. There's a lot of companies out there. I tried to put together a list of, and I can actually answer these questions more one-on-one if anybody has them, about who's doing what in the space. There's so many. Some of them have folded, some of them have changed names. So just do your homework, ask friends. I heard of a couple today that I never even heard of on a call I was on earlier. So but look for help. I do think if you're doing a seated dinner, hiring one of those companies that helps you with table management and lets you do the paddle raise much more efficiently are worth the money. So for virtual only events, I think a lot of people are still continuing some of the stuff they did when they could only do virtual. So really think about, what did you do in the last couple of years if you did something virtual that was successful? And are you missing anything by not gathering in person? Is it worth it to have the wider audience? If any of those seem like the right move, just continue with it virtual only. And I think that give you some ideas of where I think those make sense. The one thing is, it's so easy, and I've done this myself, to just sort of, you have it up and next thing you're working on a project and you're really not listening. So do what you can to make it interactive, keep people involved, ask potential questions, get chat going. Be sure to send some follow-up afterward if you've talked about a report or something that gives you potential to interact with people. Again, talk about your mission, make sure that people know what it's about. And just think about if there's any way to make it a little more special. And again, if you're just doing a lunch and learn, it's not a big deal. You guys probably wouldn't have come or not come if I offered you lunch. Maybe you would have come more, but I don't know, maybe more people would have come. But you have to, based on the level of what you're doing, how much you want to do. But if it is your big event in the year, then those are maybe something worth thinking about. Where I have seen the virtual events are successful are board meetings, and most of the board meetings that I've been a part of these days are hybrid. So you'll have a group of people in the room, but for somebody who's traveling or whatever, you'll see that those are popular, and that way you get more people, and even if they're not there. The lunch and learns like we're doing today, I think you can do some cultivation events or educational events well to just be virtual, not needing an in-person component, and seeing a little less workload to get it up and going and still having a lot of success. So that ends my formal presentation. and it gives us about 15 minutes to answer any questions. I think I answered all the ones that were thrown out, Irene, but let me know if I didn't.
I think so, but folks, please let us know by dropping in the chat if Amy did not answer your question, or if you have some new questions or thoughts or comments based upon what she shared in the second part of the presentation. Amy, I was just going to share when you talk about board meetings, I know for the COB collaboratives, our board meeting attendance has been higher and we start and finish on time when we meet virtually. But the downside is since we are cross sector and bringing people in from across the county and across the different sectors, I don't know that we have that same esprit de corps that we used to. So you have to try to, work with your board chair to build that.
Yes, I agree. There's no denying I've been working remote for at least partially for almost 19 years. I am very familiar with the pros and cons of being in the office and not being in the office. And the reality is you can't completely escape the water cooler culture, both good and bad, when you're only virtual. And I think for certain people, myself being one, that if you're a super like task oriented, get it done, move to the next thing, then you don't really always have that team building or idea sharing in the same way. I think if you can do both, I think the board meeting is actually a decent one, at least maybe one or two of your four maybe that you have to do hybrid, because you may get some people will come and you'll get a little bit of that, but then you'll also capture the people that just couldn't make that time and place for some reason.
Yeah. Anybody have a event coming up that you would like to share with us or have some questions? We're part of our early learning initiative. We have these, I think it's every other month, so bi-monthly convenings, and they're virtual. It's a curriculum or program across the country. And the man from Harvard, Dr. Ferguson, he calls you out if you have your screensaver on. That's how he keeps everybody engaged, and he will just call you out. If you are like in your car, you'll get a pass, but you need to show your face and explain and say, okay, you can be off camera until you get to your destination. So pretty funny.
Yeah, that is great. My name and number is up there. My email's up there. If anybody wants a copy of that book electronically, I'm happy to send it. If you have questions, I'm always happy to jump on the phone and help you out. Obviously, if you need more help, my company is happy to do that as well. But I'm always willing to just share some information if you have a question, or just I can't find a venue for 2,000 people or whatever, or I have a quandary with this, or will you look at my sponsor deck, or whatever. Happy to do that kind of thing. So actually, I have a little more information on this page about all of us and
Yes,
where we are.
So,
but I appreciate everybody coming today.